صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا تقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. Together. يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرة ولا لقبائحي ساترة ولا لشيء من عمل القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك. ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي، وقصرت بي أعمالي، وقعدت بي أغلالي، وحبسني عن نفعي بعد آمالي، وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها، ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي. يا سيدي، فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي، من لي غيرك؟ أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي، أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي، ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك، وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحجة علي في جميع ذلك، ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك، وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري، وفكني من شدي وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني. Together. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي، أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك، وبعد ما انطوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك، ولهج به لساني من ذكرك، واعتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك، هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيت، أو تبعد من أدنيت، أو تشرد من آويت، أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي، أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة، وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة وبشكرك مادحة، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة، وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة، وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة. ما هكذا الظن بك، ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك. يا كريم يا رب، يا كريم يا رب، يا كريم يا رب. وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها، وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، وعلى أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثوه، يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته، فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك، وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين؟ يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو، ولما منها أضج وأبكي؟ لأليم العذاب وشدتي أم لطول البلاء ومدتي؟ فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك؟ وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر على النظر إلى كرامتك؟ أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجاء عفوك؟
فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا، لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين، ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين، أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي. فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما. لكنك تقدست أسماؤك، أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما. أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته، وكل ذنب أذنبته، وكل قبيح أسررته، وكل جهل عملته، كتمته أو أعلنته، أخفيته أو أظهرته، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني، وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترت أن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته، أو إحسان فضلته، أو بر نشرته، أو رزق بسطته، أو ذنب تغفره، أو خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي رب يا ربي يا ربي يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب. أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة، وبخدمتك موصولة، وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا، وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي قو على خدمتك جوارحي، واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين، وأسرع إليك في البارزين، وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وأخافك مخافة الموقنين، وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك، وأقربهم منزلة منك، وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك. وجد لي بجودك، واعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا، وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وأقلني عثرتي، واغفر زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك، وأمرتهم بدعائك، وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي، يا سريع الرضا، يا سريع الرضا، يا سريع الرضا، اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء. يا من اسمه دواء، وذكره شفاء، وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء، وسلاحه البكاء. يا سابغ النعم، يا دافع النقام، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد، وافعل بي ما أنت أهله، وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله، وسلم تسليما كثيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. So last week we began our topic of Ijtihad and Taqlid, and inshallah we're going to pick up today where we left off. So last week was actually the introduction to this class / course that we're having on these nights, and tonight we want to begin with the actual content, inshallah. And so what we usually do is, in any science, in any discipline, we'll go through the terms and terminology first. We don't have too much right now to discuss when it comes to that, although as I said before, I will be using certain terms, technical terms, as we go through this class. And I'm going to use the Arabic, so that's the least that I would expect. Two things. One, the terms that we use, that we slowly learn those. And number two, the names that we might learn. And I'll tell you if a name is important or not, okay? So that you don't have to worry about which ones to remember, inshallah, which ones not to remember. We've all been there. All right, so two terms that we want to discuss tonight, and then we want to get into a little discussion as well before we end. The first term is fiqh, although we talked about it in our last session a little bit as well. We want to get a little more technical. So we want to talk about fiqh and then ijtihad itself, okay? So fiqh, as was mentioned last week, it usually is used for ahkam, but I want to get into some more details. The literal meaning of it, in lexicon, let's say, they will say fiqh means to understand something with your smarts, with your wits, okay? And to get to the depths of something with your understanding, okay? And so you'll have this term used with this definition, or for this meaning, in the Quran itself. In Surah Hud, verse 91, it says, now here the people of Shu'aib are speaking to Shu'aib, the Prophet of God. And they're probably being sarcastic here when they're saying this, and they're trying to hurt the Prophet here. They say, قالوا يا شعيب ما نفقه كثيرا مما تقول. Oh Shu'aib, we don't really understand much of what you say. We don't get what you're saying. Why I say this is sarcasm here that they're using, and they're actually trying to bother that Prophet of God, because these people of Shu'aib, eventually, if they're punished by God, if they really weren't comprehending what that Prophet of God was saying, they wouldn't deserve punishment later. Punishment comes when the hujjah is complete, when there's no excuse left, okay? And so you can't punish the people if they haven't understood really what that Prophet is saying. So here, they are being a bunch of losers, trying to get on the nerves of this Prophet, saying, "Ma nafqahu kathiran mimma taqul." We don't understand much of what you say. So what verb is used here? Nafqahu. It comes from fiqh. Okay, so it means to understand something with your mind. That's the literal meaning of this term. But then it starts getting used in our hadiths, in our literature and scripture, in the Quran. And so we'll have this term used, but now not just understanding anything, but rather understanding Islam, understanding the religion of God. Okay? I'll share this famous verse with all of you that you've heard, some of you have heard probably. It's an important verse that we might talk about later as well in the future. Surah Tawbah, verse 122. It says, فَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ مِّنْهُمْ طَائِفَةٍ لِيَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Not everyone has to go and migrate to learn the religion. Why doesn't a group from each people go to learn the religion properly? لِيَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. So they go to the depths of religion, understand it thoroughly. And religion encompasses what? Encompasses beliefs, encompasses scripture, encompasses law, rulings, akhlaq, all these things, right? The verse is saying not everyone has to go, but it should be the case that from every group of people, there is a select number that go, learn, and they come back to their people, so that they do what? That they warn their people, teach their people, لِيُنْذِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ إِذَا رَجَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ. So that these people may take heed and be careful about their akhirah and securing their akhirah. Okay, so here also you have the term لِيَتَفَقَّهُ. It comes from the root of fiqh again. But did it have to do with just laws of Islam, the do's and don'ts? No. Learning the religion in and out. Okay? So that's also a usage of it in the Quran now here we have. So it's not the actual definition, the dictionary definition that it's being used for here. It's being used for deen. And that's why the clause comes along with it. لِيَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ, in religion. And so you'll find the hadiths echoing this notion as well, and adding that little clause, فِي الدِّينِ. Okay, so I'll share with you a couple, 3 or 4 hadiths here that we have. For example, it says that our fifth Imam said, Al-Kamal, Kullu al-Kamal, At-Tafaqquh fi ad-Din. Perfection, all of it lies in what? In getting what degree? Well, here it says, At-Tafaqquh fi ad-Din, number 1. To have a good, proper, solid, deep understanding of the religion. Have you noticed some people, they're not even like seminary students or anything. But if you were to ask them questions about the deen, they have very good answers. Lots of times you'll find them on Shia chat. Okay? And I'm not saying it in a bad. Sorry about that. To manage normal affairs of life. Okay, so that's one hadith. Another hadith by our sixth Imam. Tafaqahu fid din. It's a command he's giving here. Tafaqahu fid din. Go read up on your religion. Go learn about your religion. فَإِنَّهُ, for the one who does not do this, لَمْ يَتَفَقَّهْ مِنْكُمْ. You see, once again, these verbs are being used with the same root, fiqh, okay? فَإِنَّهُ مَنْ لَمْ يَتَفَقَّهْ مِنْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ. Whoever of you doesn't dive deep to understand the faith properly, فَهُوَ أَعْرَابِيٌّ. This person in our eyes is a Bedouin, A'rabi. A'rabi doesn't mean Arab. A'rabi in Arabic means Bedouin, okay? Bedouin here, the Imam is not hating on Bedouins. Bedouins are good people too. The illiteracy that some might have, that's what he's trying to point out here. But someone might know a lot of other things. Yes, but does he have tafaqquh fi din? Does he or she have that? If they don't have that, then they're A'rabi in the eyes of the Imam. And so this pursuit of knowledge is something that has to be going on. And it's not always going to be fun either. It's like cardio. Who likes cardio? Alright, فَهُوَ أَعْرَابِيٌّ. And then the Imam ends with this. He says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَقُولُ فَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ مِنْهُمْ طَائِفَةٍ. He recites that verse that we studied a few minutes ago. Okay? Another one. This one's, I like this one a lot because it uses force. It says, sixth Imam again, it says, لَوَدَدْتُ أَنَّ أَصْحَابِي ضُرِبَتْ رُؤُوسُهُمْ بِالسِّيَاطِ. I'm okay with my companions getting whipped and lashed in the head with whips, حَتَّى يَتَفَقَّهُ, until they learn their deen properly. In other words, I can't tolerate a companion of mine. You see, you and I who claim to be Shia, it's easier to be Shia in the more emotional months of the year, okay? And it's a little harder to be Shia outside of those months, okay? It's a whole package. Both of them are important. So we have to have both. The Imam here is saying, that's how far I'm willing to go. That's how important it is. Why? Because a father will sometimes physically punish their son or daughter for not doing good in school. Why? Because they dislike them? No, because they like them and they know their future depends on that. So the Imam also understands our future, which is the akhirah, also depends on us properly understanding and reading up on and studying the faith. Yes, it takes time, it takes work, and sometimes it's not going to be too fun. I mean, who's having fun right now? All right, he raised his hand. Give that by A+. Technical meaning though, this fiqh, whose definition was understanding anything properly, then is being used in the Quran mostly to describe the ones who will go deep in their understanding of the religion and properly learning about their faith. This now, when we look at the technical meaning of it today, and its usage technically today, fiqh is referring to that derivation of Islamic law. So you see what happened here? It was first used very generally in the dictionaries. Then when the Quran and Hadith use it, they use it with a clause to narrow it down to proper understanding of the faith, of the religion and religious teachings. Then you go further, it reaches a point where us Muslims are using this for a certain branch of the faith, which is the Islamic law, the legal side of things. We call that only fiqh. Now someone might say, oh, why did we do that? Well, here we are right now, okay? And that's what it's referring to when you hear the word fiqh. It is being used for a branch of Islamic tenets. You have aqaid, beliefs. No one refers to that as fiqh anymore. You have akhlaq and akhlaqiyat. No one refers to those as fiqh anymore. Right? But if you're going to go with the Quranic usage, these are also, a person who wants to have fiqh of the religion also learns these things. Now someone might say, why did we change it? How dare we? Brothers and sisters, sometimes the Quran will use a term in a certain way, and the Imams might use the same term in another way. It's just something that happens. For example, in the Quran, mu'min will refer to a believer, but then when you go in our hadiths, especially our fiqhi hadiths, the term mu'min is used for a specific group of the Muslim ummah, not for all of them. And they're referred to as Muslim, not mu'min, the rest. Okay? So this happens sometimes, even with the culture that the Imams were in. Okay. So we got rid of the clause, fit deen. And we generalized, we narrowed fiqh down to Islamic law only, and that's where we're at. And as I said last session, do not confuse fiqh with ahkam. Ahkam is those sheer, raw rulings of Islam, without any explanation of where they came from. This is najis, this is wajib, this is haram. That's ahkam. But fiqh refers to that science that pushes you to the point where you can derive these laws, these ahkam. Okay, so that's fiqh. Ijtihad now. Let's talk about ijtihad. This one also has a literal meaning, and then its usage in the hadiths, and then a technical usage. Okay? So, what it comes from, ijtihad, it comes from juhd or jahd, some say, which means to make an effort to get something done. And something done that's not easily done. Okay? So you don't say, I did ijtihad to carry that water bottle with me. Carrying a water bottle doesn't take too much work. It doesn't take too much effort. But to carry something heavy, you say, I pushed myself to the limits. I did my juhd. I exhausted my juhd in getting this done. Okay? And the Quran talks about people who, they swear to the Prophet. They swear, jahda aymanihim. They will do their best to convince the Prophet, and they swear in everything that we're not behind this fitna that happened, but they are behind it, you know? Alright, so that was the literal meaning of it. But then you look in the hadiths, for example, you'll find ijtihad doesn't mean to just get anything done. It's talking about religion again, probably, when this term is used, okay? So for example, you'll have hadith, usikum bi taqwallah wal wara' wal ijtihad. The Imam says, I am encouraging you to do three things. Number one, to have taqwallah, to obey the commands of Allah, number one. Number two, al-wara', to take precaution when it comes to your faith. Don't walk on the edge. Stay away from haram altogether. Okay, there's a difference between these two. Sometimes you walk on the edge, you don't fall off. That's good. You had taqwa. Wara' means not even to get close to the edge. And wal ijtihad. The third thing the Imam here says to do is ijtihad. What does ijtihad here means? What does it mean here? It means to try your best to get what you're supposed to get done when it comes to the faith. Okay? Not to be lazy. Or for example, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله يجتهد في العشر الأواخر ما لا يجتهد في غيره. That the Prophet would do ijtihad in the last 10. What do you think he's talking about here? Which last 10? The Prophet would do ijtihad in the last 10 in a way that he wouldn't do in any other days. Of which month? Of the month of Ramadan. The last 10 days, it's famous that the Prophet would really, like they even say he would roll up his, whatever he would sleep on, his little mattress or whatever it was. He would say, we don't have time to sleep anymore. You know, it's time to do ibadat all the way. So he would do ijtihad here. It means what? Making that effort, pushing yourself to those limits. All right, but now, once again, you have a technical usage of this term. Nowadays, if you say ijtihad, just like fiqh has its own usage now, ijtihad will also refer to the process of making an effort to derive Islamic law. Of course, you're going to be deriving it from the sources that it comes from. If anyone wants to see what the rules of God are, what's the natural thing you're going to do? If someone wants to see what Christianity says about the do's and don'ts, where are you going to go? First thing that comes to your mind is going to be the Bible or the Judaic faith. Same thing. You go to the main source, which is the scripture, and you try to derive from there. And then sometimes there will be an oral tradition as well. For us, it's our hadiths. For example, in Judaism, there'll be the Talmud, for example. A lot of the rules of Judaism come from the Talmud. Okay? So obviously that's where you go for this. So you make an effort by going to the sources. Okay. And so a mujtahid is a person who knows this process of gaining these laws. All right, so anyone who is a faqih is going to be a mujtahid. These are used interchangeably. A faqih is a mujtahid. Mujtahid is faqih. Same thing. They can derive Islamic law. So far, so good, right? But then usually you'll have this in books where there will be a discussion of a good ijtihad and a bad ijtihad. This is where there will be some who might not be as aware of what's out there. They will find a problem here when it comes to ijtihad. They'll say ijtihad is wrong. And so you're like, if ijtihad is the process of deriving law, okay, why is it that someone is going to condemn this and criticize it? As a matter of fact, you look in history, you'll find that some of the greatest mujtahideen, and we'll read some of them, have criticized ijtihad. Baba, you yourself, you're a mujtahid and you're criticizing ijtihad. What's wrong with you? How are we supposed to, God is telling us it's wajib for us to learn the laws. Where are we supposed to get it from? There's a process that we go through, and that process can be as simple as opening up a hadith book even. Right now, we haven't discussed how ijtihad exactly works. Let's just assume it's opening up the Quran and going through it, trying to find my mas'ala, my issue, has it been addressed or not, and going through the hadiths. This is the process, right? So we're putting the name ijtihad on this process. We're putting the name fiqh on this process. So what can be wrong about this? What can be so bad about this? Why would it be criticized? And so we have this dilemma here. And so here, I want to read to you a little bit from Shahid al-Sadr again. So last week we talked about how he had some things to say in the introduction of one of his books, Durusun fi Ilm al-Usul. It's a very famous book. And here also, a few, maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 pages later, he talks about this now, the permissibility, and it's been translated twice to English, by the way, this book. So if you can find it, you can read up on this yourselves as well, although it needs explanation. I personally, when I looked at the English, when I wanted to bring it to read off of you, read off of it for you, I had to keep looking at the Arabic because, you know, the Arabic is something else. And Shahid al-Sadr himself, this guy is very specific in the way he writes as well, okay? But I'll read to you the English of what he says. Now, he points this out. He says, clearly it should be fine. Ijtihad should clearly be fine. Right? Before I read his excerpt, I just want to get us ready for it. It should be fine because look, not all Islamic laws are easy to figure out. Okay? Just building up on what I was saying before. They're not easy to figure out. So there has to be a due process, and we called that ijtihad. So why should there be a problem? And then this is where you're like, oh, the fact that we put the name and title Ijtihad on this process is the problem. Why? Because Ijtihad throughout history has been used for other things too. Okay, and I'll go through that with you, reading off of Shahid al-Sadr. So is Ijtihad okay? It might seem like a harmless question. But no, there's a lot of baggage with this term, and that's why there's a problem here. And that's why some people, even today, they say, Astaghfirullah, how dare you do ijtihad? Okay? Because ijtihad has been condemned. Let's go read why it's been condemned, how it's been condemned, and then we'll see that, oh, this is just a fallacy of a term having more than one meaning, and everyone, not everyone, but some people's minds going towards one meaning versus the other meaning, and then finding fault in the whole thing. You can find examples of this in the English language, the Farsi language, probably Urdu, Arabic, everywhere. Okay? Now, what does he say? He says, Shahid al-Sadr, he says, and I'm speaking slower so that you guys can follow, inshallah. Usually I don't speak this slow. So in the course he says, of clarifying this, it is necessary that we mention the development through which the word ijtihad passed. In order to clarify how the dispute which occurred over the permissibility of the process of derivation and the outcry that was aroused against it were the result only of an inaccurate understanding of the technical vocabulary. This is why it's super important for people to read and ask and educate themselves, because before you know it, you're going against something that the Imams are for just because the same term has been used. Now, someone might say, well, why did we use the same term for it? It's happened. And we'll get to where this happened, by the way. Okay? But it's happened now. And we call this ijtihad. You don't like it? Call it derivation of Islamic law. It's just longer, man. It doesn't sound cool. It was only of an inaccurate understanding of the technical vocabulary and of inattention to the transformations through which the word ijtihad passed in the history of the discipline. Okay? And so he begins. He talks about it in lexicon. He says, it is lexically derived from jahd or juhd, which means expending one's utmost effort to carry out some task. This word had first been used in the legal sphere, okay, in law, Islamic law, to express one of the rules or principles, or usul we call them, which some Sunni legal schools laid down and proceeded with. I'm going to explain all of this, okay? Namely, that the jurist, so now he's explaining what ijtihad meant in the Sunni school of thought, in the some Sunni legal schools of thought, what the ijtihad meant there, and what they would do with it. He says that when a jurist, when he wants to derive a legal ruling and does not find a specific divine injunction and command for it, the relevant ruling in the Quran or Sunnah, he can't find it. So what do? You want to figure out, hey, is lobster halal or not? I keep using this lobster example, I'm sorry. Okay? Most Maraja today say it's not okay to eat it. Ayatollah Fadlallah and maybe others, they believe that it's okay. I'm just letting everyone know the ruling, the actual ruling, so that when I use examples, you don't get confused what the actual ruling is. Those are the ruling, but we're going to keep using this lobster example. We'll use it later too, okay? You can tell what I'm going to have for dinner after this. All right, so, for example, a mujtahid will look in the Sunni school, some legal Sunni school of thought, will say, I can't find lobster in the Quran. And I can't find it in our hadiths either. What should I do? He then sits down and thinks for himself and will employ something like qiyas. We'll talk about all of these later. Istihsan, other things, and will come to the conclusion using their own mind, I think this should be haram. I think this should be halal. This is also referred to as a ra'i, and using your own mind and opinion on things. So this is what he's talking about here. He says, when they look and they do not find anything in the Quran and Sunnah, what do? It has recourse to ijtihad. Then goes to ijtihad. So what do we have? We have Quran, we have Sunnah, and then we have ijtihad. If you remember last session, what did the Shia school have? Quran, Sunnah, Aql, Ijma'. We never had something called ijtihad in there. But this will be next to Quran and Sunnah, albeit after Quran and Sunnah. If I don't find anything in Quran and Sunnah, then I'm going to use my own mind. Let me open a parenthesis here. There are books that have been written. One of them, for example, is by the Sayyid Sharafuddin al-Musawi al-Amili. It's called Al-Ijtihad fi Muqabil al-Nas, if I'm not mistaken. That there were some throughout the history of the Prophet and the Imams who would do ijtihad even if the Quran or Sunnah was there and saying the opposite. That's horrible. We really criticize that. Okay? And so books have been written on this. The companions of the Prophet would say one thing, they say, we don't think this is the case. You know, as if the Prophet is a mujtahid and they're also a mujtahid. The books have been written on these. Okay? the different cases, all of them, lots of the companions, not lots, but a good number of them you'll find. And so most of them are going to be controversial in the Shi'i school of thought as well. They're going to be controversial figures. So you'll have that. But here it's saying, no, 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 no. What they would do, not those companions or others that might have sometimes disagreed with the Prophet. So you have a Quran or Sunnah, but you still disagree with it. No. These mujtahids in that Sunni legal school of thought, they say, according to what Shaykh Sadr says here, they say, look, we couldn't find it in the Quran. We couldn't find it in the Sunnah. Now we're going to go to our own ijtihad and our own ra'i and figure this out on our own. But brothers and sisters, what's the problem with this? Does it give you 100% yaqeen that this is the rule of Allah? It doesn't. So we have a problem with that. Okay? So he goes on. He says they would make recourse to ijtihad. Here he says ijtihad means personal thinking. The jurist, when he or she does not find a nas, so this is one of our first Arabic words here, a nas with a nun and a sad, with a shadda on it. Nas, and the plural of this is nusus. Okay, this term is used a lot in fiqh. Nas means when you anything that is Quran or Sunnah. When you have something, some literature for something, you have a nas for it. In Arabic, nas means to jot something down, record something by writing, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so but it's used also in fiqh for that idea of having Quran or Hadith for something. So nas is either Quran or Hadith. He says when he or she does not find a nas, they resort to their particular thinking, the thinking of their own, their subjective rationale and thinking. Seeks inspiration from it and builds on the basis of making the law be whatever seems preferable according to his or her personal thought. And then he says this is sometimes also called ra'i. Okay, so Shaykh Sadr, he explains, this is the ijtihad, that this is what the term ijtihad meant back then. And then he goes on to explain that he adds more and elaborates more on this Sunni school of thought understanding here. He brings a name, and that is the name of none other than Abu Hanifa. Okay, so if we ever are speaking about Abu Hanifa and his ijtihad and the way he would do fiqh, he's known for this. He's known for employing this qiyas, this ijtihad, these istihsanat as we call them. These are terms we'll talk about later. Okay. What would he do? He says major schools in Sunni law proclaimed this idea, the leader among them being the school of Abu Hanifa. Okay? At the same time, this idea encountered strenuous opposition from the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. Imam said, you either get it from Quran or you get it from us. Now, someone here will say, I'm opening another parenthesis here, someone will say, but the Shi'is, they also said aql, and even the Sunnis might have it, but you said aql, using the mind. So what is the difference between aql and ijtihad here that you're calling out right now and condemning? And the answer is, the difference is the yaqeen that one brings about versus the other one. Aql, if you remember last week we spoke about this. The aql that's used in fiqh, it is so narrow in scope, it's as if it doesn't even exist. That's at least my understanding. Okay? It has to be sheer philosophical aql. Okay? And we'll give examples of this later. This is something to discuss later. I don't want to talk about it now. But that is something that you will say that this is something everyone understands. Everyone understands, not just me, Abu Hanifa. Sheer, pure intellect. Okay? What the instances of that are, very, very minimal. Okay? That's one thing. Versus, oh, I feel like this might be the case, so I'm just going to go with it. Oh, I have 70% like certainty, so I'm going to go with it. No, 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 no. 100%. Either you follow Quran or you follow Sunnah in the Shia school of thought. There is not a third option here next to those two that's called ijtihad. Okay? So he says the Imams were against this. And yes, we have many hadiths condemning ijtihad, condemning qiyas, and the likes of these things. So he says, strenuous opposition from the Imams and the jurists, the faqihs, who adhered to the school of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. So tracing the word ijtihad indicates that the word carried this meaning and was used to express it from the time of the Imams all the way till the 7th century after Hijrah. Okay? When did the Ghaybat al-Sughra end? 329. and it started around 260 AH. So 7th century to the 2nd century is almost 4 or 5 centuries after ghaiba. The term ijtihad is being used in this sense. So 4 centuries, 5 centuries of ulama that are coming, what are they going to do? Naturally, they will condemn ijtihad. But they themselves are mujtahids in our usage of the term. Okay? So he says, all the way till the 7th century, the accounts transmitted from the Shia Imams condemn ijtihad, meaning by it that legal principle which adopts personal thinking as one of the sources of a ruling. The attack on this legal principle had also entered the realm of writing in the age of the Imams and the age of the transmitters who conveyed the hadiths of the Imams. What's he saying here? He says during the time of the Imams themselves condemned. Okay? And during the time of the Imams, there were some people who were writing books. They weren't transmitting hadiths. They were writing their own books against ijtihad as well, who were of the Shia probably, of course. Okay? And the names of these books have been mentioned, but I don't want to bring names that we don't really need. Okay? The names of their authors and their books. And these are in the books of Rijal, some of them, like Al-Kashi. He's mentioned these. Alright. But it makes its way to the 4th century onwards. Then I'm going to talk about names now. So, people are writing books against it. There are hadiths against it. There are people who are writing books during the times of the Imams and during the times of the Muhaddithin against it. Everyone's writing against it. So now we can tell why this term, by some today might even seem as a problem, because when you look at the sources, when you look at the books, what do you find? Just negativity, negativity, negativity. I'm going to give you 5. Well, actually, I'm going to leave this for our next session because it went longer than I thought. I don't want to take too long. But from next week, inshallah, we're going to go through what Shaykh al-Saduq says. These are the fathers of Shi'ism, by the way. Shaykh al-Saduq, Shaykh al-Mufid, Sayyid al-Murtada, Sharif al-Murtada, brother of Sayyid al-Radi, compiler of Nahj al-Balagha. Okay? Shaykh al-Tusi and Ibn Idris. This is like an all-star team, okay? Straight up, okay? These are names that we have to remember, and we'll talk about them later. All right? So these are 5. And we want to go to them and see what they say about ijtihad. Man, do they destroy ijtihad? And then we want to talk about Shaykh al-Sadr's conclusion that he draws from all of this and the explanation he has. And I want to give you some examples of both usages of ijtihad today and what the difference is. And then you'll see, whoa, these are miles apart from each other. As a matter of fact, the only mistake we might have made, and I don't even want to call it a mistake, but for some they'll have this concern of why was it used? Yes. Some might have this criticism that why did we ever even use the term of ijtihad if it was used negatively in the first, let's say, 6, 7 centuries of Islamic history. Okay? Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Any questions before we end? Can I explain qiyas? So qiyas, when we get to the different methods of ijtihad, there, when we talk about the Sunni school of thought a little bit, we'll talk about qiyas. And also there's some good articles that have been written on this. Are all forms of qiyas wrong, or some of them wrong? And we'll talk about that when the time comes. Yes. For now, qiyas, I'll just say, means analogy. We'll talk about this. I'll give you an example next week for this as well. Okay? To make an analogy between two things and then use the ruling of one of them and apply it to the other one that's similar to it. Okay? So that's what they use for this qiyas. They usually use the term analogy. Yes. Expand more on aql and how that's different from personal thinking. So once again, when we get to the different methods of ijtihad and the different sources of ijtihad, we'll get there. We're going to discuss Quran, we'll discuss hadith, and then aql as well. For now, just understand that the difference that we will have for aql and ijtihad that is condemned is one has to bring about 100% certainty, or else it won't count. The other one though is like whatever. I personally feel that I'm convinced, even if it's 70%, I'm convinced that this is probably the rule. Let's go with this, you know? That's the difference right now that you need to know, inshallah. Any other questions? All right. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.